BC, the Royal BC Museum. Here's the book, Museums at the Crossroads. Jack Lohman, good to see you. Fascinating chats we've had in the green room, here on the couch, talking about the history. Interesting ride you've had. You came on board, in the last year for the museum here on the West Coast. What's the experience been like for you, for the attraction and what is actually showcased and the changes you've made?
Well, I've arrived at the Royal BC Museum. I had no idea whatsoever that it was the largest museum, I'm yet to be proved wrong, in Canada. It's got some sort of, I think, 7 million objects, 2.5 kilometers of archives, and some of the most iconic objects, I think, of telling Canada's story. I don't think you can tell Canada's story without the museum. And so, I'm thinking, why aren't these collections better known internationally? Not just across, British Columbia, not just across Canada, but everywhere.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you face for the museum to attract the audiences to come over to Victoria and learn about the important history?
Well, you have to sort of talk up the collections. I mean, what we're doing at the Royal BC Museum, we're putting the collections on UNESCO's sort of World Heritage list for archives, for objects, etc. Punching up their importance, if you like, talking up their importance, and making sure that schools can, connect with the museum.
And you've had the unique experience of working at museums all around the world. When you look at the objects you've just mentioned here in our museum, how does this match up globally?
Look, it's huge. I mean, in terms of size, it's much bigger than most national museums I've ever come across. This is interesting because it's specific to a region. So it's not an encyclopedic museum of everything you find in the world. There are no Egyptian mummies. But what you find is the whole Pacific Northwest coast encapsulated in that museum. Its nature, of course, its dioramas are world famous. I mean, wherever I go in the world, people say how much they love the museum. And they like that slice of wilderness. They like those taxidermy, the jaw-dropping ethnology that we have. I mean, the First Nation stories are so rich here. And you've got some really world-class museums anyway. We're in an ecology of world-class museums. And you think of the Museum of Anthropology, the Museum of Vancouver, the Vancouver Art Gallery, etc. Clearly, I'm a great champion of our own museum. And we've got a lot to do there.
And when you look at the purpose of museums, period, for unifying a global community, you even read an essay about this in your book. How important is that, and how successful is that for museums, not only for ours here, but all around the world, for the sense of purpose?
Well, museums are very important because they, tell us what's important in life. They give us a sense of, our lives, if you like. We see history reflected in the museums, but it works differently in different countries. In Rwanda, for example, museums act as orphanages for genocide victims. Wow. 20 years ago they had their genocide. They've created orphanages. In other countries, in Russia, they may be more political. Here, I think the tool is around history and engaging more with schools. And I think that's something that we really need to step up generally here in Canada.
And if we're going to go inside the Royal BC Museum, where do we start? Because that's a lot of real estate you just mentioned off the top. What's the starting place?
Well, the starting points are always collections. And when you've got so many of them, you've really got to make sure they're accessible. And in our case, we have big archives. We're like the Royal Ontario Museum and the Ontario Archives combined together. And we've really got to look at new facilities for the archives and new facilities for the collections. But we've got great exhibitions. We've got Vikings coming up as part of our program of showing treasures from other cultures. And we've got a focus on First Nations languages, an exhibition opening in June. There's constantly an exciting program. It's one of the most dynamic museums of the world, I like to say.
Well, you're leading the charge and you speak very well about it. Jack, thanks so much for coming on. We have a quick giveaway if you want to check it out with the family. Contest at btvancouver.ca, subject line Royal BC. And again, here's the book, Museums at the Crossroads. This man's been around the world. Great insights all around.
Thanks, Riaz.
Thank you, sir. Quick break. Top news stories coming your way next, right here on Breakfast Television.